The knife trembled in Alara's hand as she pressed her back against the cold stone wall, listening to the footsteps drawing closer down the corridor. Tonight was the night everything could fall apart. 10 years of careful lies were about to be tested by a man whose eyes were rumored to see through anything. She had practiced this walk 1,000 times. Slow, careful, her fingers brushing the wall as if searching for a path she could not see. She had practiced the way her eyes should drift, unfocused, never quite landing on anything. She had practiced the tilt of her head when someone spoke to her, turning toward the sound instead of the source. 10 years of practice, and still her heart pounded as if this were the very first day. Alara Whitfield was 27 years old, and for a decade, the entire Silver Crescent pack believed she was blind. It began on a spring morning when she was 17. She had watched her older sister, Marisol, dragged before the pack elders and bound to a stranger twice her age during a claiming ceremony. Marisol had screamed for someone to stop it, and no one had. That night, Alara sat by her sister's door and listened to her cry until dawn. Marisol was never the same after that. Her laughter disappeared. Her spirit dimmed like a candle starved of air. She became a shadow living inside her own home, obedient and hollow, bound forever to a man she never chose. Alara made a decision that night that would shape the rest of her life. She would never let that happen to her. She spent months learning about a rare and dangerous herb called nightshroud root, which, when brewed correctly, could dull the shine in a wolf's eyes and make them appear clouded, like a person who could no longer see. She practiced walking with her eyes closed through the forest behind her home until she could navigate every root and rock by memory alone. She trained her ears to catch sounds most wolves ignored: the shift of fabric, the creak of a floorboard, the change in someone's breathing. By the time she turned 18, she could convincingly move through an entire room full of strangers, and not one of them would suspect that she saw every single detail. The pack doctor confirmed her blindness after a supposed hunting accident that Alara had staged herself, using a controlled burst of firecracker root disguised as a mishap with a hunting trap. No one questioned it. Grief clouds judgment, and pity makes people careless. From that day forward, Alara was known throughout Silver Crescent as the blind daughter of the Whitfield family, an Omega-2 damage to be considered valuable in a claiming. It worked exactly as she hoped. Every year, when the claiming ceremonies came, alphas from neighboring packs would walk the lines of unclaimed Omegas, searching for a mate worth bonding with. Every year, they passed Alara without a second glance. A blind Omega was seen as broken, unworthy, unable to properly serve or protect a pack. She was invisible, in the one place where being seen meant losing everything. For 10 years, Alara lived free, in her own strange, quiet way. She helped in the pack gardens. She read books by candlelight late at night, when no one could see her holding them the wrong way in public. She laughed with her few trusted friends when the doors were closed, and every single day, she reminded herself of the price of the freedom she had built. One mistake. One flicker of her eyes catching something too quickly. One person growing suspicious enough to test her. That was all it would take to destroy everything. Tonight, the 10th claiming ceremony of her life was approaching, and Alara had convinced herself this would be the final performance. After this year, the elders had hinted that Omegas over the age of 27, who remained unclaimed and disabled, would be quietly moved into permanent care roles within the pack, safely out of the claiming pool forever. Freedom, real freedom, was so close she could almost touch it. Then the messenger arrived. It happened 3 days before the ceremony. A rider came through the gates of Silver Crescent Pack, carrying a banner none of them had seen in years, a silver wolf crest wrapped in gold thread, the mark of the Ashworth bloodline. The pack elders gathered in the great hall, murmuring in disbelief. Alpha King Draven Ashworth was coming. Alara heard the news from her friend Ivy, a sharp-tongued beta girl who worked alongside her in the gardens, and who was one of the very few people who treated Alara like a full person, instead of a fragile burden. The Alpha King himself, Ivy whispered, gripping Alara's arm as they knelt over a bed of herbs. Do you understand what this means? He rules over every pack on the continent. He hasn't personally attended a claiming ceremony in over 200 years. Alara kept her eyes low, letting them drift the way a blind woman's might, though inside her mind was racing. Why would he come to Silver Crescent? We are a small pack. There is nothing here worth his attention. No one knows for certain, Ivy said. Some say he is searching for a fated mate. There are rumors that his wolf has never accepted anyone, not once in all his years as king. They say his patience is running out, and the elders across every territory fear what might happen if the Alpha King never finds his match. Ilara's stomach tightened, though she could not explain exactly why. A fated mate was not something she needed to worry about. She was blind, damaged, useless in the eyes of any Alpha searching for a bonded partner. The Alpha King would walk past her exactly as every other Alpha had for the last 10 years. There was nothing to fear, except something inside her did not believe that. The days leading up to his arrival passed in a blur of preparation. The pack scrubbed the training grounds, repainted the gates, and rehearsed the ceremonial greetings, until every movement felt stiff and forced. Ilara continued her routine, moving through the pack grounds with slow, careful steps, letting her fingers trail along walls and fences as guides, keeping her eyes soft and unfocused whenever anyone was near. On the morning of his arrival, the entire pack gathered at the front gates. Ilara stood near the back with the other unclaimed Omegas, positioned exactly where the elders always placed her, far from the center, easy to overlook. She kept her chin low and her hands folded, the posture of someone accustomed to standing quietly while the world moved around her without needing her attention. Then the wind shifted. It was subtle at first, a change in the air that made the hair on Ilara's arms rise. Every wolf around her seemed to feel it too, a collective stillness rippling through the crowd like a held breath. Something powerful was approaching, and every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, though she did not understand why. The gates opened, and Alpha King Draven Ashworth stepped through. He was not what Ilara expected. She had imagined an older man, weathered by centuries of ruling, cold and distant in the way stories always described kings of ancient bloodlines. Instead, the man who walked through the gates looked to be in his early 30s, with dark hair swept back from a sharp, commanding face, and eyes the color of storm clouds right before lightning struck. He moved with a quiet, controlled power that made the entire crowd shrink back instinctively, as if his very presence pressed against the air itself. Ilara kept her eyes lowered, practicing the same soft, unfocused gaze she had used for 10 years. But as he passed through the crowd, something strange happened. She felt a pull, a warmth blooming low in her chest, radiating outward like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. Her wolf, usually silent and controlled after years of suppression, stirred violently inside her, straining toward him with a force she had never felt before. She dug her nails into her palm to keep from reacting. Across the courtyard, Draven's steps faltered. It was slight, barely noticeable to anyone who was not looking directly at him, but Ilara caught it. His head tilted, nostrils flaring slightly, as if catching a scent that did not belong. His storm-gray eyes swept across the crowd, searching, until they landed somewhere near the back, where the unclaimed Omegas stood in their careful, practiced rows. Ilara forced herself to remain perfectly still, eyes unfocused, breathing steady. She had done this 100 times before. She could do it again. But Draven did not move on the way every other Alpha had. He stood frozen for a long moment, his jaw tightening, his gaze narrowing as though trying to solve a puzzle he could not quite see the shape of. The pack elders, sensing his hesitation, hurried forward to guide him toward the great hall, offering greetings and pleasantries in an attempt to smooth over whatever had caused him to pause. He allowed himself to be led away, but not before his eyes swept back across the crowd one final time, lingering just a fraction too long on the space where Ilara stood. That night, Ilara could not sleep. She sat by her window, staring out at the moonlit training grounds, replaying the moment over and over in her mind. She told herself it meant nothing. Alphas were sensitive to disturbances in a pack's energy, especially one as powerful as the Alpha King. Perhaps he had simply sensed a discrepancy somewhere, an Omega slightly out of place, nothing more. But deep down, in the part of her mind she rarely allowed herself to listen to, Ilara knew the truth. That warmth she had felt blooming in her chest was not something an ordinary Alpha's presence could cause. She had felt fated mate bonds, described by others in hushed, reverent tones her entire life, an unmistakable pull that could not be faked or ignored. She had always assumed she would never experience it herself, given the life she had chosen. Now, for the first time in 10 years, Alara was afraid of something other than being claimed. She was afraid of being seen. The following morning, Ivy found her in the garden, unusually pale and quiet. "You look like you saw a ghost," Ivy said, kneeling beside her. "Something like that," Alara murmured, keeping her eyes lowered as she pulled weeds from the soil with practiced, careful movements. Ivy lowered her voice. "They say the Alpha King requested to personally oversee tomorrow's claiming ceremony. He wants to inspect every unclaimed Omega himself before the ritual begins." Alara's hands froze over the soil. In 10 years, no Alpha had ever personally inspected her up close. The pack elders always presented her from a distance, citing her condition as a reason to spare visiting Alphas the discomfort of interacting with someone so clearly damaged. It had always worked in her favor, keeping prying eyes far enough away that her disguise remained safe. But an inspection meant closeness. It meant standing face to face with a man whose gaze had already, somehow, caught something no one else ever had. "Alara," Ivy said, noticing her stillness. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Alara lied, forcing her hands to move again, though her mind was racing through every possible outcome of tomorrow's ceremony. She could feign illness. She could ask to be excused. She could disappear into the forest until the Alpha King left Silver Crescent territory entirely. But running would only draw more attention, and attention was the one thing she could not afford. There was only one option left. She would have to face him, maintain her disguise under the closest scrutiny she had ever endured, and pray that 10 years of practice would be enough to protect the freedom she had fought so hard to build. That night, as the pack settled into uneasy sleep, Alara stood alone in her room, staring at her reflection in a small, cracked mirror she rarely allowed herself to use. Her eyes stared back at her, sharp and clear and entirely too alive for a woman who was supposed to be blind. Tomorrow, those eyes would be tested by the most powerful wolf in the world. She did not know if she was ready. She only knew that she had no choice but to try. The claiming grounds had been transformed overnight into something grand and formal. Long silver banners hung from the surrounding trees, and rows of torches lined the perimeter, casting flickering light across the gathered pack. Alara stood in her designated place among the unclaimed Omegas, her heart hammering beneath a carefully composed expression of calm. The ceremony began with the usual formalities, elders speaking of tradition and honor, of the sacred bonds that held packs together across generations. Alara barely heard any of it. Her focus remained locked on the front of the gathering, where Alpha King Draven Ashworth stood beside the Silver Crescent pack leader, his expression unreadable, his storm-gray eyes sweeping methodically across the crowd. One by one, the unclaimed Omegas were called forward for inspection. Alara watched as each of them stepped up, heads bowed, waiting silently as Draven studied them with brief, practiced efficiency, before moving to the next. He showed no particular interest in any of them, his expression remaining distant and controlled. Then her name was called. Alara's legs felt unsteady as she stepped forward, keeping her movements slow and deliberate, her eyes soft and unfocused, exactly as she had practiced for a decade. She could feel the weight of every gaze in the crowd upon her, whispers rippling through the gathered pack, as they always did when the blind Omega was presented. She stopped at the designated spot, lowering her head slightly, waiting. Draven did not move on quickly the way he had with the others. He stepped closer, close enough that Alara could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough that the pull in her chest intensified into something almost unbearable. She kept her breathing steady through sheer force of will, her eyes remaining carefully unfocused, despite every instinct screaming at her to look up, to meet his gaze fully. "Your name," Draven said, his voice low and controlled, though something beneath the surface suggested restrained intensity. "Alara," she said softly, turning her head toward the sound of his voice, rather than looking directly at him, exactly as a blind woman would. A long silence stretched between them. Alara could feel his eyes studying her, searching for something she prayed he would not find. She kept her expression calm, her posture relaxed, in the practiced way of someone entirely comfortable with darkness. Then, so quietly that only she could hear it, Draven spoke again. "You flinched," he said, "when I stepped closer." Blind eyes do not flinch from silent movement. Alara's heart stopped. She forced herself to remain still, her mind racing through a dozen possible responses.
I heard your footsteps, Alpha King, and felt the shift in the air.
My other senses have grown stronger over the years to compensate. It was a reasonable explanation, one she had used successfully countless times before. But something in Draven's gaze told her he was not entirely convinced. Look at me, he said quietly. Alara froze. In 10 years, no one had ever asked her to do that directly. Blind eyes were expected to drift, unfocused, never quite meeting another's gaze. To refuse now would draw suspicion. To comply risked everything. Slowly, carefully, Alara lifted her head, allowing her eyes to settle in his general direction, keeping them deliberately soft and glazed, unfocused in the way she had trained herself to appear for a decade. Draven studied her for a long, unbearable moment. Then, without another word, he stepped back and moved on to the next Omega in line, as though nothing unusual had occurred. Alara nearly collapsed with relief as she returned to her place among the other unclaimed Omegas, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. She had passed the test. Whatever suspicion had crossed his mind, she had managed to quiet it, at least for now. But as the ceremony continued around her, Alara could not shake the feeling that Draven Ashworth's storm-gray eyes lingered on her far longer than they should have, and that whatever he had sensed in that brief, terrifying exchange was far from forgotten. The ceremony concluded without further incident, the unclaimed Omegas dismissed, as the pack moved into the celebratory feast that traditionally followed. Alara slipped away from the crowd as quickly as she could manage without drawing attention, retreating toward the quiet edge of the training grounds where the noise of celebration faded into the rustle of wind through the trees. She needed a moment alone to steady herself, to process the terrifying closeness of what had just occurred. Her hands were still trembling as she pressed them against the cool bark of an old oak tree, taking slow, deliberate breaths. "You handled that well," a voice said from behind her. Alara's entire body went rigid. She turned slowly, keeping her eyes carefully unfocused, though her heart was pounding so loudly, she was certain he could hear it. Draven stood a short distance away, his expression unreadable in the moonlight, his presence somehow both commanding and quietly patient. "Alpha King," Alara said, bowing her head respectfully. "I did not realize anyone had followed me." "I did not follow you," he said simply. "I was already here." A lie, though a small, harmless one, the kind powerful men told when they wished to observe someone without alarming them first. Alara understood the game being played, though she was not yet certain what Draven's true intentions were. "Is there something you require of me?" she asked carefully. Draven was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle beneath her careful mask of calm. 10 years is a long time to maintain a lie, he said finally. Alara's blood ran cold. She kept her expression steady through sheer force of will, though every instinct screamed at her to run. "I do not understand what you mean, Alpha King." "I think you do," Draven said, his voice low and even, without malice, though there was an unmistakable weight to his words. "I have met blind wolves before, Alara. Their eyes carry a certain stillness, a certain emptiness, that comes from a lifetime without sight. Yours do not carry that stillness. Yours are sharp, focused, alive in a way that suggests you see far more than you allow anyone to believe." Alara's mind raced, searching desperately for an explanation, a deflection, anything that might convince him he was mistaken. But the words would not come. 10 years of careful preparation had never accounted for a man capable of seeing through her so completely, so quickly. "Why would I lie about something so significant?" she asked instead, choosing to meet the accusation directly, rather than continue denying it outright. Something shifted in Draven's expression, a flicker of understanding crossing his sharp features. "That," he said quietly, "is exactly what I intend to find out." Alara's heart pounded as she searched his face for any sign of anger, any indication of what consequences might follow this discovery. But instead of anger, she found something far more unsettling in his storm-gray eyes. Curiosity, and something warmer beneath it, something that mirrored the strange, undeniable pull she had felt from the very first moment he stepped through the pack gates. "Walk with me," Draven said, his tone leaving little room for refusal, though it was not quite a command either. I believe we have much to discuss, Elara Whitfield. And though every instinct in her body urged her to refuse, to run, to protect the fragile freedom she had built over the past decade, Elara found herself unable to resist the quiet authority in his voice. She took a slow breath, allowed her carefully practiced mask to remain in place for just a moment longer, and stepped forward into the darkness beside the one man capable of unraveling everything she had spent 10 years building. Whatever happened next, Elara understood with sudden, terrifying clarity that her carefully constructed world was about to change forever. Draven led her away from the noise of the feast, past the last row of torches, until the sound of celebration faded into the quiet hum of the forest. Elara walked beside him with careful, measured steps, her eyes still deliberately unfocused, though her mind was working faster than it ever had in 10 years of practiced deception. He stopped beneath a wide, old tree at the edge of a clearing, turning to face her fully. The moonlight fell across his sharp features, and for the first time since his arrival, Elara allowed herself to truly look at him, just for a moment, before catching herself and lowering her gaze again. "You do not need to keep pretending," Draven said quietly. "Not with me. Not here." "I do not know what you believe you saw," Elara said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "I saw a woman flinch from silence," he said. "I saw eyes that track movement no blind eyes could track. I saw someone who has spent a very long time perfecting a performance most would never think to question." He paused. "But I am not most people, Elara." She said nothing, staring at the ground between them, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "I am not here to expose you," Draven said, his voice softening slightly. "I only wish to understand why." The question hung in the air between them, heavier than anything Elara had faced in the last decade. She had guarded her secret so fiercely, for so long, that the idea of speaking it aloud felt like tearing open a wound she had spent years learning to hide beneath layers of careful stitching. "If I tell you," she said slowly, "what happens to me?" "That depends entirely on the truth," Draven said, "but I give you my word. Whatever you tell me tonight remains between us, unless you choose otherwise." Elara studied him for a long moment, searching his expression for any sign of deception. She found none, only quiet patience, and something else beneath it, something warm and unfamiliar that seemed to reach toward the same pull she had felt earlier, deep in her chest. She took a slow breath and finally let her eyes lift fully to meet his, sharp and clear and entirely unclouded. "My sister was claimed against her will when I was 17, Elara said quietly. I watched the light disappear from her eyes the moment the bond was forced upon her. She never smiled the way she used to. She never argued, never laughed freely, never seemed to exist as her own person again. I made a promise to myself that I would never let that happen to me." Draven listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable but attentive. "So I found a way to disappear," Elara continued. "I learned to fake blindness so convincingly that no alpha would ever consider me worth claiming. For 10 years it worked. I was free. I chose my own days, my own thoughts, my own small piece of a life that belonged entirely to me."
"And now?"
Draven asked softly. Elara hesitated. "Now, the most powerful wolf in the world has discovered the truth, and I do not know what that means for the freedom I fought so hard to build." Draven was quiet for a long moment, his storm-gray eyes studying her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "Do you know what a fated bond feels like, Elara?" The question caught her off guard. "I have heard others describe it," she said carefully. "A pull, a warmth, a sense of recognition beyond words. That is what I felt the moment I stepped through your pack's gates," Draven said. "I have searched for centuries, Elara. I have met thousands of wolves, across every territory under my rule, and never once, in all that time, has my wolf reacted the way it did the moment your scent reached me." Elara's breath caught in her throat. "You believe I am your fated mate?" "I do not believe it," Draven said quietly. "I know it." The words settled over her like a weight she was not prepared to carry. Everything she had built, every careful lie, every year of quiet, hard-won freedom, suddenly felt fragile beneath the truth of what he was suggesting. "I cannot be claimed," Elara said, her voice trembling slightly despite her effort to remain composed. "I will not become what my sister became. I will not lose myself to someone else's authority over my life. I am not asking you to lose yourself, Draven said, stepping closer, though he kept enough distance to allow her the space she clearly needed. A bond is not ownership, Elara. Whatever your sister experienced, whatever cruelty was forced upon her, that is not what I offer. How can I trust that? Elara asked, her voice sharper now, years of guarded fear rising to the surface. You are the Alpha King. Your word is law, across every pack on this continent. What happens to a woman who defies the will of a king who claims her? Draven's expression shifted, something flickering behind his eyes that looked almost like understanding, almost like respect. You misunderstand me, he said. I am not interested in claiming a woman who has spent 10 years fighting for her freedom, only to strip that freedom away the moment I have the power to do so. If a bond exists between us, Elara, it will exist because you choose it, not because I demand it. Elara studied him carefully, searching for any hint of falsehood in his words. She found none, though 10 years of guarding her secret had taught her that trust was a dangerous thing to offer too quickly. I need time, she said finally. I need to understand what any of this means before I can decide anything. Then you shall have it, Draven said. I will not force a bond, and I will not expose your secret. But I will remain in Silver Crescent territory until I understand what is happening between us. It was more than Elara had expected, and far less reassuring than she wished it could be. A powerful alpha remaining in her home pack, watching, waiting, was hardly the safety she had spent a decade building for herself. But it was, for now, the only option available to her. As they walked back toward the distant lights of the celebration, Elara felt the weight of unfamiliar hope pressing against the fear she had carried for so long, uncertain which of the two emotions she trusted less. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows near the tree line, a young beta wolf named Corwin Ashgrove, whose sharp eyes had followed their entire exchange with growing, calculating interest. Corwin had wanted Elara's position among the favored Omegas for years, resentful of the attention she received despite her supposed condition, jealous of the quiet respect she commanded, even in her assumed weakness. He had always suspected something was wrong with her story, some detail that never quite added up, though he had never possessed proof strong enough to challenge it. Tonight, he finally had it. He watched them disappear back toward the feast, his mind already working through the possibilities this discovery presented. Exposing Elara's secret could destroy the reputation she had spent a decade building, but it could also position him favorably in the eyes of the pack elders, especially if it meant disrupting whatever strange connection seemed to be forming between her and the Alpha King. Corwin smiled to himself in the darkness, already imagining the leverage this secret might provide. Over the following days, Draven remained in Silver Crescent territory, officially citing diplomatic matters requiring his continued presence, though the pack elders whispered amongst themselves about the true reason behind his extended stay. Elara found herself caught between maintaining her careful disguise in public and navigating increasingly complicated private conversations with Draven whenever they found moments alone. She continued her daily routines in the gardens, moving with the same careful, measured steps she had practiced for years, though she was acutely aware of Draven's presence whenever he passed through the training grounds or the common areas of the pack. Their eyes would meet briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, before she would return her gaze to its practiced, unfocused state. Ivy noticed the shift immediately. You have been different since the ceremony, Ivy said one afternoon, as they worked together in the herb garden, her sharp eyes studying Elara's expression carefully. Something happened that night, didn't it? Elara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal even to her closest friend. The Alpha King discovered my secret, she admitted quietly. Ivy's hands stilled over the soil, her expression shifting to alarm. Elara, that is dangerous. If he exposes you— He has not, Elara interrupted gently. He gave me his word he would not, at least not until I decide what I wish to do. Decide what, exactly? Ivy asked, though something in her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. Elara took a slow breath. He believes I am his fated mate. Ivy's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and cautious hope crossing her features. Elara, do you understand what that means? A fated bond with the Alpha King himself? I understand what it could mean if I allow it to happen, Elara said, her voice tight with old fear. I have spent 10 years avoiding exactly this outcome, Ivy. I cannot simply abandon everything I have built because a powerful man claims destiny has chosen me for him. Ivy studied her carefully. Not every claiming has to look like what happened to your sister. How can you be certain of that? Elara asked, frustration creeping into her voice. You have not lived through what I have lived through. You have not watched someone you love disappear into obedience because a bond stripped away everything that made her herself. Ivy's expression softened with sympathy, though her words remained firm. I have not lived it. You are right. But I have watched you live in fear for 10 years, hiding behind a lie that has cost you friendships, opportunities, and moments of joy you deserve to experience openly. I only wonder, Elara, if the fear you carry from your sister's experience has convinced you that every possible future looks the same, when perhaps this one does not. Elara said nothing, though Ivy's words settled uncomfortably in her chest, refusing to be easily dismissed. That evening, as the sun began to set over the training grounds, Elara found herself walking the familiar path toward the edge of the forest, seeking the same quiet solitude she always sought when her thoughts grew too loud to bear. She was not entirely surprised to find Draven waiting near the old oak tree, as though he had known she would come. You seem troubled, he observed as she approached. I am considering things I never expected to consider, Elara admitted, settling onto a fallen log, a comfortable distance from where he stood. Would it help to speak them aloud? Draven asked, lowering himself onto the ground nearby, his posture surprisingly relaxed for a man who ruled over every pack on the continent. Elara studied him for a moment, before deciding to answer honestly. My friend believes I have let my fear define every future I imagine for myself. I am beginning to wonder if she might be right. What does your fear tell you about a future with me? Draven asked quietly. That I would lose control of my own life, Elara said. That whatever freedom I have built would disappear the moment a bond was formed. And what does the rest of you believe? Draven asked. Elara hesitated, considering the question carefully before answering. The rest of me remembers the warmth I felt the moment you arrived, the pull that felt like recognition rather than danger. I do not know how to reconcile that feeling with everything I have spent a decade fearing. Draven was quiet for a long moment, watching her, with an expression she could not quite decipher. Perhaps, he said finally, you do not need to reconcile them immediately. Perhaps you simply need time to discover which feeling reflects the truth of what could exist between us. Elara nodded slowly, though the uncertainty in her chest remained unresolved. As the last light of evening faded into darkness around them, she found herself, for the first time in 10 years, allowing herself to imagine a future she had never dared to consider before. Neither of them noticed Corwin watching from a distance once again, his mind already turning toward the next opportunity to use what he had discovered to his own advantage. Corwin Ashgrove waited 3 more days before making his move, watching carefully as Draven's presence in Silver Crescent territory continued to draw whispers and speculation throughout the pack. He wanted to be certain of his information before approaching anyone with it, wanted to understand exactly how much leverage the secret could provide before spending it carelessly. He found his opportunity on a quiet afternoon when Elara was alone in the herb garden, Ivy having been called away to assist with matters in the main hall. Corwin approached slowly, his expression carefully arranged into something resembling friendly concern, though Elara had learned long ago never to trust the softness in his voice. Elara, he said, settling nearby without invitation. I wondered if we might speak. She kept her eyes carefully unfocused, turning her head toward his voice in the practiced manner she had perfected over a decade. Of course, Corwin. What do you need? I saw something interesting a few nights ago, he said, his tone deceptively casual. Near the old oak tree, at the edge of the training grounds, you and the Alpha King, deep in conversation. Elara's hands stilled over the herbs she had been tending, though she forced herself to maintain her composure. The Alpha King has taken an interest in understanding our pack's traditions during his stay. I imagine he speaks with many of us. Perhaps, Corwin said, leaning slightly closer, though it seemed like a rather intense conversation for simple tradition. And your eyes, Elara, they seemed remarkably attentive for someone who cannot see. Elara's blood ran cold, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. I do not understand what you are suggesting. I think you understand perfectly well, Corwin said, his friendly tone dropping away to reveal something colder beneath it. I have suspected for years that your condition was not entirely genuine, Alara. Too many small inconsistencies, too many moments when your reactions seemed just slightly too precise for someone truly without sight. Now I have proof. You have nothing, Alara said, her voice steady, despite the panic rising in her chest. I have an observation the pack elders would find very interesting, Corwin said. A decade of deception, used to avoid claiming ceremonies, is a serious offense, Alara. I imagine the consequences would be severe, especially now that the Alpha King himself seems personally invested in your situation. Alara studied him carefully, understanding immediately that this was not a conversation about mere suspicion. This was a negotiation. What do you want, Corwin? A slow, satisfied smile crossed his features. I have wanted a place among the pack's favored circle for years, Alara. Recognition, respect, opportunities that have always seemed to pass me by, while lesser wolves receive them instead. I believe you understand exactly what I mean. You want me to convince the elders to elevate your standing, Alara said flatly. I want you to ensure my voice carries weight in decisions that matter, Corwin said. In exchange, your secret remains safe with me. Alara's mind raced through the implications of his demand. Corwin was ambitious and calculating, the kind of wolf who would use whatever power he gained to further his own interests without regard for the consequences to others. Elevating his standing within the pack could create problems far beyond her own secret, problems that could ripple outward and harm people she cared about. I need time to consider this, she said carefully. You have until tomorrow evening, Corwin said, rising to his feet. I would advise you not to waste it, Alara. The Alpha King's continued presence here suggests he values whatever connection exists between you. I imagine even a king as powerful as Draven Ashworth would think twice before defending a woman exposed as a decade-long liar before his own eyes. He walked away without another word, leaving Alara alone in the garden with her thoughts spinning in dangerous, uncertain directions. For the first time since Draven's arrival, the careful walls she had built around her secret felt as though they were crumbling entirely beyond her control. She spent the remainder of the afternoon in a haze of anxious thought, unable to focus on her usual tasks, her mind cycling through every possible outcome of Corwin's threat. Confessing to Draven felt like the only honest path forward, yet doing so risked drawing him into a conflict that could complicate everything between them. Refusing Corwin's demand risked immediate exposure before the pack elders, a consequence she had spent a decade desperately trying to avoid. By evening, she found herself once again walking toward the old oak tree, seeking out the quiet solitude that had become her refuge in recent days. She was not surprised to find Draven already there, though the weight of Corwin's threat pressed heavily against her chest as she approached. You seem far more troubled than usual, Draven observed, studying her expression carefully, as she settled onto the familiar fallen log. Alara hesitated only a moment, before deciding that honesty, however dangerous, was the only path she could bear to walk any longer. Corwin Ashgrove saw us together the night of the ceremony. He suspects the truth about my condition, and he has demanded favors in exchange for his silence. Draven's expression shifted immediately, something sharp and protective flashing behind his storm-gray eyes. What kind of favors? Influence within the pack, Alara said, standing among the elders that he believes he deserves, but has never earned. And if you refuse? Draven asked, his voice low and controlled, though Alara could sense the tension building beneath his calm exterior. He will expose me, Alara said quietly. 10 years of deception, laid bare before the entire pack, and likely before you as well, though he does not yet realize you already know the truth. Draven was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tightening as he considered the situation. You will not need to negotiate with him, he said finally. Draven, this is not your responsibility to resolve, Alara said, though something in his protective tone stirred a warmth in her chest she had not expected. You are wrong, Draven said firmly. Whatever bond exists between us, whatever future we may or may not build together, I will not stand by while someone attempts to exploit your fear for personal gain. That is not acceptable to me, Alara, and it should not be acceptable to you either. What do you intend to do? Alara asked, uncertain whether to feel relieved or alarmed by the determination in his voice. I intend to remove his leverage entirely, Draven said. If your secret is revealed on your own terms, with context and understanding rather than exploitation, Corwin's threat loses all its power. Alara's breath caught in her throat. You mean telling the pack elders myself? I mean taking control of your own story, Draven said, rather than allowing someone else to weaponize it against you. The idea terrified her, yet as she considered it further, she recognized a strange kind of freedom hidden within the suggestion. For 10 years, she had lived in constant fear of exposure. Every day, a careful performance, designed to avoid a truth she believed would destroy her. But perhaps continuing to hide was no longer protecting her at all. Perhaps it had simply become another kind of prison, one she had built for herself out of necessity that had long since outlived its purpose. I am afraid, Alara admitted quietly, the confession feeling strange and vulnerable after years of guarding every emotion so carefully. That is understandable, Draven said gently, but you do not have to face this fear alone, Alara. Whatever happens when the truth comes to light, I will stand beside you through it. Alara studied him carefully, searching for any hesitation in his words and finding none. Something in his steady, unwavering presence offered a comfort she had not allowed herself to feel in a very long time, a sense that perhaps, for the first time since her sister's claiming all those years ago, she was not entirely alone in facing the fears that had shaped her entire adult life. Tomorrow, she said finally, her voice steadier than she expected, I will speak with the elders tomorrow, before Corwin has the chance to use what he knows against me. Draven nodded, something like quiet pride crossing his features. Whatever they decide, Alara, know that the choice to reveal your truth on your own terms is already a victory, regardless of the outcome that follows. As the stars began to appear overhead, scattered across the darkening sky, Alara allowed herself a small, uncertain sense of hope, fragile though it remained. Tomorrow would bring consequences she could not fully predict, but for the first time in 10 years, she would face them as herself, fully seen, rather than hidden behind a decade of careful lies. Morning arrived far too quickly for Alara's liking, the pale light filtering through her window feeling almost mocking in its calm ordinariness against the storm brewing within her chest. She dressed slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared for what would likely be the most consequential conversation of her entire life. Ivy arrived at her door before she had finished, her expression tight with worry after Alara had explained the situation the previous evening. Are you certain about this? Ivy asked, watching her friend with concern. There may be other options, Alara. Other ways to handle Corwin's threat that do not require exposing yourself entirely. I have spent 10 years hiding, Alara said quietly, meeting her friend's gaze with newfound steadiness. I am tired of allowing fear to dictate every decision I make. Whatever happens today, I would rather face it as myself than continue living as someone I am not. Ivy studied her for a long moment, before nodding slowly. Then I will stand beside you, whatever the elders decide. The two women made their way toward the great hall together, where Draven had already arranged for the pack elders to gather, citing a matter of importance requiring their immediate attention. Alara's heart pounded with every step, though she forced herself to maintain a steady, composed posture, the same discipline that had allowed her to maintain her disguise for a decade, now serving a very different purpose. The great hall was already filled with murmuring elders by the time they arrived, along with several senior pack members whose presence suggested word of an important announcement had already begun to spread. Draven stood near the front of the room, his expression calm and controlled, though his eyes softened slightly when they found Alara entering. Corwin Ashgrove stood near the back of the gathering, his expression shifting from curiosity to alarm, as he realized Alara had called this meeting herself, understanding immediately that whatever leverage he believed he held was about to be stripped away entirely. The pack leader, an elderly wolf named Alden Thornwood, called the gathering to order, his weathered face creased with curiosity as he addressed the room. We have been asked to convene regarding a matter of significant importance. Alara Whitfield, you wish to speak before this council. Alara stepped forward, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her despite her determination to remain composed. She took a slow breath, allowing herself one final moment of hesitation, before speaking the truth she had guarded so carefully for 10 long years. 10 years ago, she began, her voice steadier than she expected. I made a decision that has shaped every aspect of my life since. I was not blinded by accident. as this pack has believed for a decade. I chose to fake my blindness, deliberately and carefully, in order to avoid being claimed against my will." A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the gathered elders, several faces shifting from confusion to disbelief. Elara continued before her courage could falter. "I watched my sister Marisol claimed against her will when I was 17 years old," she said, her voice growing firmer with each word. "I watched everything that made her herself disappear beneath the weight of a bond she never chose. I made a promise to myself that I would never allow the same fate to claim me, and so I found a way to disappear from consideration entirely." Alden Thornwood studied her carefully, his expression unreadable. "You have deceived this entire pack for 10 years, Elara. Do you understand the severity of such an offense?" "I understand it completely," Elara said. "I understand that what I did violated the trust this pack placed in me, and I accept whatever consequences this council deems appropriate. But I could not continue allowing fear and deception to control my life a moment longer, especially not when someone sought to use my secret as a weapon against me." Her eyes flickered briefly toward Corwin, whose face had gone pale with the realization that his leverage had evaporated entirely. Several elders turned to follow her gaze, understanding beginning to dawn across their expressions. "Corwin Ashgrove approached me yesterday," Elara continued, "demanding favors and influence within this pack, in exchange for his silence regarding my secret. I refuse to allow my fear to be exploited any further, which is why I stand before you now, choosing to reveal this truth on my own terms, rather than allowing it to be used against me." The murmurs in the room shifted immediately, several elders turning sharp, disapproving glances toward Corwin, whose calculated scheme now stood exposed alongside Elara's decade-long secret. Alden Thornwood's expression hardened as he addressed the younger wolf directly. "Is this true, Corwin?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of authority accumulated over decades of leadership. Corwin hesitated, clearly searching for some way to salvage the situation, though the evidence against him seemed increasingly difficult to deny. "I merely observed what others failed to notice," he said carefully. "I intended only to bring the matter to this council's attention. By demanding personal favors in exchange for silence, rather than reporting your suspicions honestly," Draven interjected, his voice carrying an unmistakable authority that silenced the room immediately. "That is not observation, Corwin. That is exploitation." Corwin's expression faltered under the weight of the Alpha King's direct accusation, understanding immediately that any further attempt at deflection would only worsen his situation. He said nothing further, his silence serving as its own quiet confession. Alden Thornwood turned his attention back to Elara, his expression softening slightly, as he considered the full context of her confession. "Your deception was significant, Elara, and this council cannot simply dismiss it without consequence. However, your reasons, and your choice to reveal the truth before it could be weaponized against you, speak to a character this council must weigh carefully in its judgment." He turned to consult quietly with the other elders gathered around him, their murmured discussion stretching across several tense minutes while Elara stood before them, her heart pounding with uncertainty. Ivy remained close beside her, offering silent support, while Draven's steady presence at the front of the room provided an anchor against the anxiety threatening to overwhelm her. Finally, Alden Thornwood turned back to address the gathering. "This council recognizes the extraordinary circumstances surrounding Elara's decision. While her deception cannot go entirely without consequence, we acknowledge that her actions were born from legitimate fear rather than malicious intent, and that she chose honesty over continued concealment when faced with the opportunity to do otherwise." Elara held her breath, waiting for the verdict that would determine the course of the rest of her life. "Elara Whitfield will perform a period of service to this pack, assisting in matters that benefit the community as a whole, as recompense for the years of deception practiced upon this council," Alden Thornwood announced. "However, no further punishment shall be enacted against her, and her standing within this pack shall remain intact." A wave of relief washed over Elara so powerfully that she nearly stumbled, Ivy's steadying hand catching her arm before she could lose her balance entirely. She had expected far harsher consequences, and the leniency of the council's judgment left her momentarily speechless. As for Corwin Ashgrove, Alden Thornwood continued, his tone hardening once again as he turned toward the younger wolf. Your attempt to exploit a fellow pack member's fear for personal gain represents a far graver offense than the deception you sought to expose. This council will convene separately to determine appropriate consequences for your actions." Corwin's face drained of color as several senior pack members moved to escort him from the hall, his calculated scheme having backfired entirely against him. Elara watched him go with a strange mixture of relief and pity, understanding that whatever ambition had driven his actions had ultimately cost him far more than he had ever hoped to gain. As the gathering began to disperse, murmurs of surprise and curiosity following the shocking revelations of the morning, Draven made his way through the crowd, toward Elara, his expression warm with quiet pride. "You did well," he said softly, once they had found a moment of relative privacy near the edge of the hall. "I did not expect such leniency," Elara admitted, still processing the weight of what had just occurred. "I prepared myself for far worse." "Alden Thornwood is a fair leader," Draven said, "and your courage today spoke louder than the fear that drove your original deception. That distinction matters, Elara, more than you may realize." Elara studied him carefully, a new kind of clarity settling over her thoughts, now that the weight of her secret no longer pressed so heavily against her chest. For the first time in 10 years, she stood before her entire pack as herself, fully seen, and the world had not ended as she had always feared it would. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, uncertain whether she meant the question in relation to her service to the pack, or to the far more complicated question of whatever existed between herself and the man standing before her. Draven's expression softened, understanding the layered nature of her question without needing further explanation. "Now," he said gently, "you have the freedom to discover who you truly are, without the weight of a decade-long lie shaping every choice you make. Whatever comes next, Elara, I believe that discovery belongs entirely to you." For the first time since her sister's claiming ceremony 10 years ago, Elara allowed herself to imagine a future unclouded by fear, uncertain though it remained, and found, to her surprise, that the uncertainty no longer terrified her the way it once had. News of Elara's confession spread through Silver Crescent territory within hours, carried from house to house in hushed, astonished conversations. Some pack members regarded her with newfound suspicion, uncertain how to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the truth of her decade-long deception. Others, surprisingly, approached her with quiet admiration, recognizing the courage it must have taken to maintain such a performance for so long, and the even greater courage required to finally lay it aside. Elara found herself navigating this new reality with cautious steps, uncertain how to exist in a world where her eyes no longer needed to remain carefully unfocused, where she no longer needed to measure every movement against the fear of discovery. It was, in its own strange way, more disorienting than the secrecy had ever been. Her service to the pack began within days, assigned to assist the elderly and infirm throughout Silver Crescent territory, tending to their needs and ensuring their comfort as recompense for the years of deception she had practiced. She approached the work without complaint, understanding it as a fair price for the freedom she had stolen for herself over the past decade. It was during one of these visits, tending to an elderly wolf named Hazel Fenwick, who had known Elara's family for generations, that the conversation turned toward the past, in ways Elara had not anticipated. "Your sister used to visit me often, before her claiming," Hazel said, her voice frail but clear, as Elara helped arrange the blankets around her. "Marisol had a beautiful spirit, full of laughter and curiosity. I always wondered what happened to that spirit after her bonding." Elara's hands stilled. "She changed," she said quietly. "The bond took something from her that never returned." Hazel studied her with knowing eyes. "Not every bond destroys what it touches, child. I have witnessed both kinds in my many years, bonds that diminish and bonds that strengthen. The difference lies not in the bond itself, but in the character of the person offering it." Elara considered this carefully, Hazel's words echoing thoughts Ivy had voiced days earlier, thoughts she had spent a decade refusing to fully entertain. How can anyone know which kind of bond they are entering before it is too late to escape it? "Perhaps," Hazel said gently, "one cannot know with absolute certainty, but one can observe the character of the person offering the bond, long before any ceremony takes place. Does he listen when you speak? Does he respect your boundaries when you set them? Does he value your voice as much as his own authority?" Alara thought of Draven's steady patience over the past days, his insistence that any bond between them would exist only through her own choice, his protective anger at Corwin's attempt to exploit her fear rather than her own vulnerability. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she began to recognize the answers to Hazel's questions forming clearly in her mind. "I do not know if I am ready to trust those answers," Alara admitted quietly. "Readiness," Hazel said with a small, knowing smile, "often arrives more slowly than the truth itself. There is no shame in taking the time you require, child. Wisdom lies in questioning rather than assuming, and you have clearly learned to question far better than most." As the days passed, Alara found herself spending increasing amounts of time with Draven, their conversations evolving beyond the careful, guarded exchanges of their first meetings into something warmer and more genuine. He asked about her interests, the books she read late at night, the small moments of joy she had carved out for herself, even within the confines of her decade-long disguise. She found herself, in turn, curious about the centuries he had lived, the weight of leadership he carried, the loneliness that seemed to linger beneath his commanding presence. "You have ruled for centuries," Alara said one evening as they walked together along the edge of the training grounds, the sun setting in brilliant shades of orange and violet overhead. "Has it always been lonely?" Draven considered the question carefully before answering. "Power creates distance, whether intended or not. Few approach a king honestly. Most calculate their words carefully, hoping to gain favor or avoid displeasure. It becomes difficult, over time, to distinguish genuine connection from careful performance." "And yet you sought out my company," Alara said, "even knowing what I had hidden from my entire pack." "Perhaps that is precisely why," Draven said, a small, thoughtful smile crossing his features. "You had no interest in gaining my favor, Alara. If anything, you actively avoided my attention for as long as possible. There was an honesty in that avoidance I found more genuine than any performance I have encountered in centuries." Alara studied him carefully, warmth spreading through her chest at the unexpected vulnerability in his admission. "I suppose we are both rather skilled at avoiding the attention of others, in our own different ways. Perhaps that is exactly why the bond between us feels different than either of us expected," Draven said quietly. "Neither of us sought this connection, and yet here we stand, drawn together, despite every effort to avoid exactly this outcome." They walked in comfortable silence for a while longer, the weight of unspoken possibility settling gently between them, rather than pressing with the fear it once carried. Alara found herself, for the first time since her sister's claiming all those years ago, allowing herself to imagine what a future, built on genuine partnership, rather than forced obligation, might actually look like. That night, as she prepared for sleep, Alara found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. 10 years of careful deception, born from fear and grief, had shaped nearly every decision of her adult life. Yet here she stood, freed from that deception at last, discovering that the world she had feared for so long contained possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider. She thought of Marisol, wondering how her sister might have responded to the news of her decade-long secret, wondering whether there might be some way to reach out to her after all these years of distance that had grown between them following her sister's claiming. The thought lingered in her mind as sleep finally claimed her, a new kind of hope beginning to take root where fear had lived for so long. The following morning, Alara received word that would change the course of everything once again. A messenger arrived from the neighboring Ironwood pack, carrying news that sent ripples of concern through Silver Crescent territory. Marisol's mate, the Alpha who had claimed her 10 years ago, had died unexpectedly, leaving Marisol widowed and, according to Ironwood pack tradition, eligible for a new claiming ceremony within the coming month. Alara's heart clenched at the news, old fears resurfacing alongside fresh concern for her sister's well-being. She sought out Draven immediately, finding him in discussion with Alden Thornwood regarding diplomatic matters between the packs. "I need to see my sister," Alara said, interrupting their conversation without hesitation, urgency clear in her voice. "She will be forced into another claiming, and I cannot allow her to face that again without at least attempting to help her." Draven's expression shifted immediately to concern, understanding the weight of what this news meant to Alara. "I will accompany you to Ironwood territory," he said without hesitation. "As Alpha King, I hold authority to intervene in claiming disputes, should circumstances warrant such intervention. Alden Thornwood nodded his agreement, recognizing the gravity of the situation immediately. Take whatever escort you require. Silver Crescent stands ready to support Alara's family in whatever way proves necessary. Alara felt a surge of gratitude toward both men, understanding that the support she had once believed impossible to find now surrounded her from unexpected directions. Whatever awaited her in Ironwood territory, she would not face it alone this time, and for a woman who had spent 10 years carrying every burden by herself, that realization alone offered a measure of comfort she had never expected to find. The journey to Ironwood territory took 2 full days, Alara riding alongside Draven and a small, carefully chosen escort through dense forest paths that grew increasingly unfamiliar the further they traveled from Silver Crescent lands. She spent much of the journey lost in thought, memories of her sister's laughter, before the claiming mixing painfully with images of the hollow, obedient woman Marisol had become afterward. You are worried she will not wish to see you, Draven observed during a brief rest along the trail, reading her silence with an accuracy that no longer surprised her. We have not spoken in years, Alara admitted. Not truly spoken, beyond formal greetings during rare family gatherings. I do not know if she will welcome my involvement in her situation, or resent it as unwelcome interference. Whatever her reaction, Draven said gently, your presence alone communicates that she has not been forgotten, nor abandoned. That matters, Alara, regardless of how she initially responds. They arrived at Ironwood territory as the sun began to set, the pack's grand stone hall rising against the darkening sky in imposing silhouette. Word of the Alpha King's arrival spread quickly through the gathered pack members, and they were escorted immediately to meet with Ironwood's leadership, a stern wolf named Garrick Vane who oversaw the pack's affairs during this period of transition following the previous Alpha's death. Alpha King, Garrick said, bowing formally as they entered the hall. Your presence honors our pack, though I confess surprise at such an unexpected visit. I have come regarding a matter of personal significance, Draven said. Alara Whitfield, sister to Marisol, widow of your former Alpha, wishes to see her sister. Garrick's expression shifted with understanding, though something guarded remained behind his eyes. Marisol has kept largely to herself since her husband's passing. I am uncertain whether she wishes for visitors at this time. Please, Alara said, stepping forward despite the nervous tremor in her voice. I only wish to see that she is well, and to offer whatever support she might need during this difficult time. Garrick studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. I will send word requesting her presence. The choice to receive you remains entirely her own. They waited in tense silence within the hall, Ilara's hands twisting nervously in her lap, while Draven remained steady and calm beside her, his quiet presence offering reassurance she desperately needed in this uncertain moment. After what felt like an eternity, footsteps echoed down the corridor, and Marisol appeared in the doorway. Alara barely recognized her sister at first glance. The vibrant young woman she remembered from childhood had been replaced by someone thinner, more guarded, her once bright eyes now carrying a weariness that spoke of years of quiet suffering. Yet as Marisol's gaze found Alara across the room, something flickered behind that weariness, a spark of recognition that had not entirely been extinguished. Alara, Marisol said softly, disbelief coloring her voice. I did not expect to see you here. I heard about your husband, Alara said carefully, rising from her seat and approaching slowly, uncertain of the welcome she might receive. I wanted to see you, to make certain you were well. Marisol's expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession, surprise giving way to something more complicated, a mixture of longing and hesitation. You came all this way, simply to check on me? You are my sister, Alara said, her voice thick with emotion. I should have come sooner. I should never have allowed so many years to pass without truly speaking with you. I am sorry for that distance, Marisol. I am sorry I was not stronger for you when everything changed after your claiming. Tears welled in Marisol's eyes as she closed the remaining distance between them, pulling Alara into an embrace that spoke of years of unspoken grief and longing, finally finding release. I always believed you stayed away because you could not bear to see what had become of me, Marisol whispered. I stayed away because I did not know how to help you, Elara admitted, holding her sister tightly. And because watching what happened to you frightened me so deeply that I built my entire life around avoiding the same fate. I am sorry that fear kept me from you when you needed me most. They remained embraced for a long moment, years of distance and unspoken pain finally beginning to dissolve between them. When they finally separated, Marisol studied her sister's face carefully, noticing something different in her expression, a clarity and openness that had not existed in previous encounters. You seem different, Marisol observed. Something has changed in you. Elara glanced briefly toward Draven, who remained respectfully at a distance, before deciding that her sister deserved the full truth. I spent 10 years hiding from the world, Marisol. I faked blindness to avoid ever facing what happened to you. I only revealed the truth recently, and I am still learning who I am, without that deception shaping every choice I make. Marisol's eyes widened with shock, though understanding quickly followed, as she considered the weight of what her sister had endured. 10 years, she whispered. Elara, I never imagined the depth of fear my experience must have caused you. It does not matter now, Elara said gently. What matters is you, and what happens next in your life. I understand you face another claiming ceremony soon. I came to offer whatever support I can provide, whatever choice you decide to make. Marisol's expression grew heavier with the mention of the upcoming ceremony, old exhaustion settling back over her features. I do not know if I possess the strength to endure another forced bond, she admitted quietly. The first nearly broke me entirely, Elara. I do not know how I would survive a second. Draven stepped forward at this admission, his expression firm with quiet authority. As Alpha King, I hold power over claiming disputes throughout every territory under my rule. If you wish, Marisol, I can grant you protected status, exempting you from forced claiming for a period of your choosing, allowing you time to heal and determine your own future without external pressure. Marisol stared at him in disbelief, hope flickering uncertainly behind her weary eyes. You would do this for me, a stranger? You are Elara's sister, Draven said simply, and no wolf should be forced into a bond against their will, regardless of tradition or expectation. I have witnessed firsthand the courage it takes to reclaim one's own life after years of fear, and I would not deny you the same opportunity. Marisol turned to Elara, tears streaming freely down her face now. Is this truly possible? After everything, could I finally have a choice in my own future? It is possible, Elara said, taking her sister's hands gently in her own. And you deserve exactly that choice, Marisol. Whatever you decide, whenever you decide it, I will be here to support you, the way I should have been all along. The following days brought formal arrangements between Draven and Garrick Vane, establishing Marisol's protected status within Ironwood territory, granting her the freedom to determine her own future without the immediate pressure of another forced claiming. Elara remained by her sister's side throughout the negotiations, watching as years of accumulated grief slowly began to loosen their grip on Marisol's spirit. On their final evening before departing back toward Silver Crescent territory, the two sisters sat together beneath the stars, speaking openly for the first time in a decade about everything they had endured, everything they had feared, and everything they now allowed themselves to hope for. I am proud of you, Marisol said quietly, studying her sister's face in the moonlight, for finding the courage to face your fears, and for finding your way to happiness, despite everything that shaped you. I have not found happiness yet, Elara admitted, glancing toward where Draven stood a respectful distance away, speaking quietly with Garrick regarding final diplomatic matters. But I believe I am finally allowing myself to imagine it as a genuine possibility. Marisol followed her sister's gaze, a small, knowing smile crossing her tired features. He looks at you the way I always hoped someone might look at me, one day, with respect, rather than ownership. Elara felt warmth spreading through her chest at her sister's observation, recognizing the truth in it, even as uncertainty about the future remained. Perhaps, she said softly, we are both finally learning that not every bond has to look like the ones we feared. As the stars stretched endlessly overhead, both sisters found themselves, for the first time in 10 long years, allowing hope to settle gently into hearts that had spent far too long, guarded against its arrival. The return journey to Silver Crescent territory felt lighter than the journey that had brought them to Ironwood. The weight of years of unresolved grief finally beginning to lift from Ilara's shoulders. She rode alongside Draven in comfortable silence for much of the way, occasionally sharing memories of her childhood with Marisol, stories she had not allowed herself to revisit in years. "You seem more at peace," Draven observed, as they made camp for their final night, before reaching Silver Crescent lands. "I feel as though I have been carrying a stone in my chest for a decade," Ilara admitted, settling near the small fire their escort had prepared. "Seeing Marisol, knowing she finally has the chance to choose her own future, has lightened that weight in ways I did not expect." "You gave her that chance," Draven said. "Your courage, in revealing your own truth, created the opportunity for her healing as well." Ilara considered this, recognizing a truth she had not fully appreciated before. Her decade of hiding had been born from fear, yet her choice to finally step into honesty had rippled outward in ways she never anticipated, touching not only her own life but her sister's as well. "I have been thinking about what Marisol said," Ilara admitted quietly, staring into the flickering flames of the campfire. "About bonds that do not have to resemble the ones we feared." "And what conclusions have you reached?" Draven asked, his voice carefully neutral, though Ilara could sense the weight of anticipation beneath his calm exterior. "I think," Ilara said slowly, choosing her words with care, "that I have spent so many years defining my freedom by the absence of connection, that I never considered whether freedom might also exist within connection, provided that connection was built on genuine respect rather than obligation." Draven remained quiet, allowing her the space to continue without interruption. "I do not know exactly what I want yet," Ilara continued, "but I know that the fear which shaped my decisions for a decade no longer feels like the only truth guiding my choices. I am willing to explore what might exist between us, Draven, without the assumption that it must end the way my sister's bond once did." Something shifted in Draven's expression, quiet joy breaking through his usual controlled composure. "That is more than I dared hope for. When I first arrived in Silver Crescent territory, searching for a bond I had begun to believe did not exist." "I am not promising a claiming," Ilara said carefully, old caution still lingering despite her growing openness. "I am promising to explore what genuine partnership might look like between us, at a pace that allows me to trust the process fully." "That is exactly the promise I hope to hear," Draven said, warmth evident in his voice, despite his measured tone. "I have waited centuries for a bond, Ilara. I can certainly wait however long you require to trust it fully." They sat together beneath the stars for a while longer, the comfortable silence between them speaking volumes that words could not adequately capture. For the first time since her sister's claiming 10 years ago, Ilara allowed herself to imagine a future built not on fear or obligation, but on genuine choice and mutual respect. They arrived back in Silver Crescent territory the following afternoon, greeted by a pack still processing the shocking revelations of recent weeks. Word of Corwin's punishment had spread throughout the community, the elders having decided upon a period of exile from the pack's inner circle, along with mandatory service to those he had sought to exploit through his scheme. Most pack members regarded the resolution as fair, understanding that his attempt to weaponize Ilara's fear represented a far graver offense than her original deception. Ilara resumed her service to the pack's elderly and infirm, though she found the work far more meaningful now that she performed it without the weight of hidden secrets pressing against every interaction. She visited Hazel Fenwick regularly, sharing updates about Marisol's situation and finding comfort in the elderly wolf's wisdom regarding matters of the heart. "You seem to be finding your way," Hazel observed during one such visit, studying Ilara's expression with knowing eyes. "I am trying," Ilara admitted, settling into her usual chair beside Hazel's bed. "It is strange, learning to exist without the constant vigilance that shaped every moment of the past decade. I find myself uncertain how to simply be present, without calculating every movement and expression." "That uncertainty will pass with time," Hazel said gently. "You are relearning trust, Ilara, both in yourself and in the world around you. That is not a swift process, nor should it be rushed." Ilara nodded, appreciating the elderly wolf's patience with her continued adjustment. "Draven has been remarkably understanding," she said, unable to prevent a small smile from crossing her features at the mention of his name. "Ah," Hazel said, a knowing smile of her own appearing. "I suspected as much, given the way your expression changes whenever his name arises." Ilara felt warmth rising to her cheeks, though she did not attempt to deny the observation. I am still uncertain about many things, she admitted. But I no longer feel as though exploring a future with him represents a betrayal of the freedom I fought so hard to protect. That sounds like genuine growth, Hazel said warmly. Trust yourself, child. You have already survived far more than most wolves ever face. Whatever comes next, I believe you possess the strength to navigate it wisely. As the days passed, Elara found herself growing increasingly comfortable within her newfound honesty, discovering small joys she had denied herself for a decade. She read openly now, no longer needing to hide the way her eyes moved across pages when others might observe her. She laughed freely during conversations, no longer calculating every reaction against the risk of revealing too much. She walked through Silver Crescent territory with her head held high, meeting the gazes of pack members directly, rather than maintaining the careful, unfocused stare she had perfected over 10 long years. Draven remained in Silver Crescent territory throughout this period of adjustment, though his continued presence began drawing increasing attention from beyond the pack's own borders. Word had spread throughout neighboring territories that the Alpha King had discovered his fated mate within Silver Crescent's small, relatively unremarkable pack, and murmurs of curiosity and speculation followed wherever he traveled. It was during one such visit from a neighboring pack's diplomatic envoy that Elara first encountered the complicated political reality of what a bond with Draven might actually entail. The envoy, a sharp-eyed wolf named Fenwick Ashby, representing the powerful Blackthorn pack, approached her directly during a formal gathering held to discuss territorial matters between the packs. "You are the Omega who has captured the Alpha King's attention," Fenwick observed, his tone carrying an edge of calculated interest rather than genuine warmth. "I confess surprise that his centuries-long search would conclude within such a modest pack." "Fate does not concern itself with the size or prominence of a territory," Elara replied carefully, sensing an underlying challenge within his seemingly innocent observation. "Of course not," Fenwick said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Though I imagine many across the continent will find themselves curious how a woman who spent a decade deceiving her own pack intends to navigate the responsibilities that accompany a bond with the Alpha King. Ruling alongside Draven Ashworth requires far more than simple affection, after all." Elara felt old anxieties stirring at his pointed words, understanding immediately that whatever bond might eventually form between herself and Draven would face scrutiny far beyond the boundaries of Silver Crescent territory. The political weight of such a connection extended into realms she had not yet fully considered. "I am still discovering what any potential bond between myself and the Alpha King might require," Elara said carefully. "But I assure you, whatever decisions I make will be guided by genuine consideration, rather than careless disregard for the responsibilities involved." Fenwick studied her for a long moment, something calculating flickering behind his gaze, before he offered a shallow bow and moved on to other conversations within the gathering. Elara remained troubled by the exchange long after he departed, uncertain how to reconcile her growing feelings for Draven with the political complexities that a bond between them would inevitably invite. That evening she sought out Draven, finding him reviewing diplomatic correspondence within the guest quarters Silver Crescent had provided for his extended stay. She relayed the conversation with Fenwick Ashby, watching his expression grow increasingly serious as she spoke. "Blackthorn Pack has long sought greater influence within continental politics," Draven explained once she finished. "Fenwick's comments likely reflect concerns from his own leadership regarding how a bond between us might shift existing power structures across various territories." "I had not fully considered the political weight such a bond would carry," Elara admitted, old uncertainty creeping back into her voice. "I do not know if I possess the experience necessary to navigate responsibilities of that magnitude." "You are not expected to navigate them alone," Draven said gently. "Nor are you expected to master such complexities immediately. Every ruler, myself included, learns through experience rather than innate knowledge. If you choose to walk this path with me, Elara, I will support you through every challenge it presents, exactly as you have supported others through their own struggles in recent weeks." Elara studied him carefully, recognizing the sincerity behind his reassurance, though the weight of political scrutiny still pressed uncomfortably against her growing sense of security. Whatever future awaited them, it seemed increasingly clear that it would require far more than simple personal courage. It would demand a strength she was only beginning to discover within herself, tested now not only by her own fears, but by a world watching closely to see how she might rise to meet them. The weeks that followed brought a steady stream of visitors to Silver Crescent territory, envoys and representatives from pacts across the continent, arriving under various diplomatic pretenses, though their true purpose remained thinly veiled curiosity regarding the Alpha King's unexpected fated bond. Alara found herself navigating an increasingly complicated social landscape, each visitor bringing their own assumptions and expectations regarding what her role beside Draven might eventually entail. Some approached her with genuine warmth, curious about the woman who had captured the attention of a king who had remained unbonded for centuries. Others, like Fenwick Ashby, approached with calculated skepticism, testing her responses for weaknesses that might later prove useful in whatever political maneuvering their own pacts intended to pursue. Ivy remained a steady source of support throughout this transition, often accompanying Alara during formal gatherings and offering blunt, practical advice regarding the various personalities she encountered. "That one wants to see if you will crumble under pressure," Ivy murmured during one particularly tense gathering, nodding subtly toward a sharp-eyed envoy studying Alara from across the room. "Do not give him the satisfaction." Alara found herself growing steadily more confident in these interactions, drawing upon the same careful discipline that had allowed her to maintain her decade-long disguise, now redirected toward navigating political complexities with growing skill. She learned to read subtle cues in conversation, to recognize genuine curiosity from calculated testing, to respond with grace, even when provoked by pointed questions designed to unsettle her. Draven watched this transformation with quiet pride, offering guidance when she sought it, but increasingly stepping back to allow her the space to develop her own approach to the challenges she faced. "You are learning faster than most rulers I have observed across centuries," he told her one evening, genuine admiration evident in his voice. "I have spent a decade reading rooms carefully, calculating responses, anticipating reactions before they occur," Alara said. "It seems the skills I developed to hide myself have become useful in learning to stand fully visible instead." Despite the growing confidence she found in these political interactions, deeper uncertainties continued to linger regarding the nature of the bond itself. Alara had grown genuinely close to Draven over the preceding weeks, finding comfort and warmth in his steady presence, yet the final step toward an actual claiming remained a decision she approached with careful deliberation rather than impulsive certainty. It was during a quiet evening walk along the edge of Silver Crescent's training grounds that the conversation finally turned toward this looming decision directly. "The pack elders have begun asking when a formal bonding ceremony might occur," Alara said, breaking a comfortable silence that had settled between them as they walked. "I imagine the pressure will only increase as more packs across the continent learn of our situation. I have deliberately avoided pressuring you toward any particular timeline," Draven said carefully, "but I understand the growing external expectations weigh upon you as well." "They do," Alara admitted, "though I find myself less troubled by external pressure than by my own remaining uncertainty. I have grown to care for you deeply, Draven. I trust the person you have shown yourself to be over these past weeks. Yet some small part of me still fears that a formal bond might change something between us, might introduce an element of obligation that transforms the genuine connection we currently share." Draven considered her words carefully before responding. "I cannot promise that a formal bond changes nothing between us," he said honestly. "Any significant commitment carries new responsibilities, new expectations from those around us. But I can promise that whatever changes occur, they will not alter the fundamental respect and partnership I have offered you from the very beginning of our connection." "How can you be certain of that?" Alara asked, old fears surfacing despite her growing trust. "Because I have watched you reclaim your own voice and strength over these past weeks," Draven said. "I have no interest in a bond that silences the very qualities that drew me to you in the first place. If anything, I hope a formal bond might allow you even greater opportunity to exercise that strength, supported by resources and authority you did not previously possess." Alara studied him carefully, recognizing the sincerity behind his words even as she continued processing the weight of the decision before her. "I need to speak with Marisol," she said finally. "Her perspective on this matters to me greatly, given everything she has experienced." Draven nodded understanding. "Take whatever time you require, Alara. This decision belongs entirely to you, regardless of any external pressure surrounding it." Alara arranged to visit Ironwood territory once again the following week, finding her sister in considerably better spirits than during their previous encounter. Marisol's protected status had allowed her the freedom to slowly rebuild her sense of self, and small signs of her former vibrant spirit had begun re-emerging in subtle ways. A genuine laugh here, a spark of curiosity there, evidence that healing, though gradual, was genuinely underway. "You look troubled," Marisol observed, as they settled together in the quiet garden behind Ironwood's main hall. "Has something happened with Draven?" "He has not pressured me," Alara clarified quickly. "If anything, his patience has been remarkable. But the Pack Elders, and increasingly the political landscape beyond Silver Crescent, continue pressing toward a formal bonding ceremony. I find myself uncertain whether my remaining hesitation stems from genuine wisdom, or simply lingering fear I have not yet fully released." Marisol considered this carefully before responding. "I cannot answer that question for you, Alara. Only you can determine the difference between wisdom and fear within your own heart. But I can share what I have observed during your recent visits, if that would help clarify your thoughts." "Please," Alara said. "You speak of him differently than you speak of anyone else," Marisol said gently. "There is warmth in your voice, genuine warmth, not the careful calculation I once heard when you described your interactions with others during your years of hiding. I do not believe that warmth exists from fear or obligation, Alara. I believe it exists from genuine connection." Alara considered her sister's observation carefully, recognizing truth within it even as uncertainty continued to linger. "I am simply afraid," she admitted finally. "Afraid that formalizing this bond might somehow diminish what currently exists between us, might introduce expectations that slowly erode the genuine partnership we have built. That fear is understandable, given everything you witnessed with my own bonding," Marisol said. "But Alara, you are not me. Draven is not the man who claimed me all those years ago. And most importantly, you enter this potential bond as a woman who has already reclaimed her own voice and strength, rather than a frightened girl forced into submission before she ever had the chance to discover who she truly was." The words settled deeply within Alara's heart, offering a clarity she had struggled to find on her own. She spent the remainder of her visit reflecting on her sister's wisdom, gradually recognizing that her lingering hesitation stemmed not from genuine doubt regarding Draven's character, but from old fears that had shaped her entire adult life, fears that no longer accurately reflected the reality of her current circumstances. By the time she departed Ironwood territory to return home, Alara had reached a decision that felt, for the first time, entirely her own, rather than shaped by either fear or external pressure. Alara returned to Silver Crescent territory 2 days later, her heart steadier, and her mind clearer than it had been in weeks. She found Draven in the guest quarters reviewing correspondence, his expression brightening immediately upon her arrival. "Your visit with Marisol went well?" he asked, setting aside his papers as she entered. "It did," Alara said, settling into the chair across from him. "She helped me understand something I had struggled to see clearly on my own." "And what is that?" Draven asked, studying her carefully. "That my hesitation regarding a formal bond stemmed from fears that no longer reflect my current reality," Alara said. "I spent a decade equating claiming with loss, with obligation, with the destruction of self I witnessed in my sister's experience. But you are not the man who claimed her, Draven, and I am no longer the frightened girl who first began hiding all those years ago." Draven remained quiet, allowing her to continue without interruption, though hope was clearly evident in his expression. "I choose this," Alara said, her voice steady and certain in a way it had never been throughout their entire courtship. "Not because the Pack Elders expect it, not because political pressure demands it, but because I have come to trust genuinely in what exists between us. I am ready to formalize our bond, Draven, on my own terms and by my own choice." Draven rose slowly from his seat, crossing the room to kneel before her, taking her hands gently in his own. "You honor me beyond words, Alara. I promise you, always, that whatever bond forms between us will remain exactly what you have chosen it to be, a partnership built on mutual respect rather than obligation or ownership." Word of their decision spread quickly throughout Silver Crescent territory, preparations for a formal bonding ceremony beginning almost immediately. The pack elders, overjoyed at the prospect of such a significant alliance strengthening their small territories standing among the continent's various packs, threw themselves into arrangements with enthusiasm that occasionally overwhelmed Alara's more modest preferences. They wished to invite representatives from every major pack across the continent, Ivy reported one afternoon, helping Alara review the growing list of preparations. Alden Thornwood believes this ceremony represents an unprecedented opportunity to elevate Silver Crescent's standing. I understand the political significance, Alara said, though a note of overwhelm crept into her voice. But I confess, I had hoped for something simpler, something that felt genuinely personal, rather than primarily political. Draven, overhearing this conversation as he entered the room, offered a reassuring smile. Perhaps we can find balance between both needs, he suggested. A ceremony that honors the political significance our bond carries, while still preserving moments that belong entirely to us, separate from the larger political spectacle. Alara appreciated his willingness to compromise, and together they worked with Alden Thornwood to craft a ceremony that would satisfy the political necessities, while still allowing for genuine, personal moments within the broader celebration. Marisol arrived from Ironwood territory a week before the ceremony, her presence offering Alara comfort and support, as the significance of the approaching event grew increasingly real. I never imagined I would witness this day, Marisol admitted, as she helped Alara select fabric for her ceremonial attire, running her fingers over a deep blue silk that shimmered like moonlight on water. Watching you choose this bond freely, rather than having it forced upon you, means more to me than you likely realize. Your healing has meant just as much to me, Alara said, embracing her sister warmly. We have both found our way back to ourselves, Marisol, in our own different ways. As preparations continued, however, unexpected tension arose from an unlikely source. Fenwick Ashby, representing Blackthorn Pack's interests, returned to Silver Crescent territory, ostensibly to extend formal congratulations regarding the upcoming ceremony, though his true intentions quickly revealed themselves during a private conversation with Alden Thornwood that Alara happened to overhear. Blackthorn Pack has long maintained close diplomatic ties with several territories now growing anxious regarding the shifting balance of power this bond represents, Fenwick explained, his tone carefully diplomatic despite the underlying threat within his words. We would strongly encourage Silver Crescent to consider certain trade concessions, ensuring continued cooperation between our territories moving forward. Alara's chest tightened at the implications of his words, recognizing an attempt to leverage the political significance of her bonding for Blackthorn Pack's own advantage. She approached the conversation directly, unwilling to allow such maneuvering to continue unaddressed. Fenwick, she said, stepping into the room with calm, deliberate confidence. I could not help but overhear your discussion. I wonder if you might clarify exactly what concessions Blackthorn Pack believes this bond entitles them to. Fenwick's expression flickered with surprise at her direct intervention, quickly masked behind practiced diplomatic composure. I merely suggest that significant political shifts often benefit from careful consideration of all parties' interests. Alara. I understand political reality requires careful navigation, Alara said evenly, but I will not allow my bond with Draven to become a tool for territorial leverage, disguised as diplomatic courtesy. Whatever agreements exist between Silver Crescent and neighboring packs will be negotiated on their own merits, not as a consequence of pressure applied through this ceremony. Draven, entering the room at that moment, regarded the exchange with evident approval, allowing Alara to handle the confrontation entirely on her own terms. Fenwick, recognizing that his attempted maneuvering had been thoroughly identified and rejected, offered a shallow bow of acknowledgement. I meant no offense, he said carefully. Blackthorn Pack simply wishes to ensure continued positive relations moving forward. Then Blackthorn Pack is welcome to pursue those relations through proper diplomatic channels, rather than through implied pressure surrounding a personal ceremony, Alara said firmly. I trust that clarification proves sufficient. Fenwick departed shortly afterward, his expression carrying grudging respect alongside his evident frustration at having his attempted leverage so directly dismantled. Draven approached Alara once the room had cleared, admiration clear in his expression. You handled that beautifully, he said. I have grown tired of allowing others to use fear or pressure to shape decisions that belong entirely to me, Alara said, a small, satisfied smile crossing her features. It seems that lesson extends well beyond my personal choices, into matters of diplomacy as well. As the day of the ceremony finally approached, Silver Crescent territory buzzed with activity, representatives from packs across the continent, arriving to witness what many were calling one of the most significant bondings in centuries. Elara found herself surrounded by well-wishers and curious observers alike, though she navigated the growing attention with a confidence that would have seemed impossible only weeks earlier. On the evening before the ceremony, she found a quiet moment alone with Draven, beneath the familiar old oak tree, where so much of their journey together had unfolded. "Tomorrow changes everything," she said softly, watching the stars begin to emerge overhead. "Tomorrow confirms what has already existed between us for weeks," Draven corrected gently. "The ceremony itself is simply a formal acknowledgement of a bond we have already built, through genuine trust and understanding." Elara nodded, recognizing the truth in his words, though nervous anticipation still fluttered within her chest. "I have spent 10 years running from exactly this moment," she admitted. "It feels strange to finally stand here, choosing it freely." "Strange, perhaps," Draven said, taking her hand gently in his own. "But also, I hope, right?" "Yes," Elara said, meeting his gaze with steady, unguarded eyes that no longer needed to hide anything from the world around her. "It feels entirely right." The morning of the ceremony arrived bright and clear, sunlight spilling across Silver Crescent territory in warm, golden waves. Elara woke early, her heart steady despite the significance of the day ahead, a calm certainty settling over her that felt entirely different from the anxious fear that had once defined every major decision in her life. Ivy arrived to help her prepare, along with Marisol, the three women sharing quiet laughter and gentle conversation as they worked through the final preparations together. The deep blue silk gown Marisol had helped select weeks earlier fit perfectly, shimmering softly with every movement, and as Elara studied her reflection in the mirror, she found herself hardly recognizing the confident, radiant woman staring back at her. "You look exactly like yourself," Marisol said softly, noticing her sister's expression. "Fully and completely yourself, for the first time in longer than either of us can remember." Elara smiled, warmth spreading through her chest at her sister's words. "I feel like myself," she admitted, perhaps for the very first time. The ceremony grounds had been transformed once again, though this time the atmosphere carried none of the anxious tension that had marked her 10th claiming ceremony weeks earlier. Silver banners mixed with deep blue fabric throughout the decorated space, representing both Silver Crescent's traditions and the personal significance Elara had requested be woven throughout the celebration. Representatives from packs across the continent filled the gathered crowd, their presence a testament to the political significance of the bond about to be formalized, though Elara found she no longer felt overwhelmed by their attention. Draven waited at the center of the ceremony grounds as she approached, his expression carrying a warmth and vulnerability that few outside their closest circle had ever witnessed from the powerful Alpha King. Elara walked toward him with steady, confident steps, her eyes clear and focused, meeting his gaze fully, without any need to hide or disguise the truth of who she was. Alden Thornwood presided over the ceremony, his weathered voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd as he spoke of tradition, of partnership, of the sacred bonds that connected packs across generations. But as the ceremony progressed toward its central moment, both Elara and Draven had insisted upon words that deviated from typical tradition, words that reflected the genuine partnership they had built together, rather than simple obligation or ownership. "I do not offer this bond as a claim upon you," Draven said, his voice steady and clear as he took Elara's hands in his own before the assembled crowd. "I offer it as a partnership, freely chosen, built upon respect for the woman you have shown yourself to be, both in your courage to hide when hiding was necessary for your survival, and in your courage to reveal yourself fully when that time finally arrived." Elara felt tears gathering in her eyes as she listened to his words, recognizing the depth of understanding behind them, the genuine respect that had defined their entire journey together. "I accept this bond," she said, her voice carrying clearly and confidently across the gathered crowd. "Not from fear, not from obligation, but because I have found in you a partner who values my voice as much as his own, who has never once asked me to diminish myself in order to fit beside him. I choose this bond freely, as an equal, and I offer the same respect and partnership in return." The formal bonding ritual proceeded, according to ancient tradition, though the words exchanged between them carried a modern understanding that few present had ever witnessed within such ceremonies. As the final elements of the ritual concluded, a warmth spread through Alara's entire being, the fated bond finally settling fully into place, though it felt less like a claiming and more like a confirmation of a connection that had already existed between them for weeks. The crowd erupted into celebration as the ceremony concluded, cheers and applause rippling across the gathered representatives from PAX throughout the continent. Alara found herself swept into a whirlwind of congratulations and well wishes, though her attention remained anchored firmly on Draven beside her, the man who had seen through her decade-long disguise and chosen, ultimately, to honor rather than exploit the truth he discovered. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around them, Alara found a quiet moment to step away, seeking out Marisol amid the joyful chaos of the gathering. She found her sister standing near the edge of the celebration, watching the festivities with a soft, contemplative smile. "Thank you," Alara said, embracing her sister warmly. "For everything. For your wisdom, your support, and for helping me understand that not every bond has to look like the one that once caused you such pain." "Thank you," Marisol replied, "for never giving up on the possibility that things could be different, both for yourself and, eventually, for me as well. Watching you choose this freely has given me hope that perhaps, one day, I might find the same courage." "You already possess that courage," Alara said gently. "You have simply been given the freedom to discover it in your own time, exactly as I was fortunate enough to discover mine." As the stars emerged fully overhead, scattered brilliantly across the clear night sky, Alara found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. 10 years of careful deception, born from genuine fear and profound grief, had shaped nearly every decision of her adult life. Yet that decade of hiding had also taught her resilience, discipline, and a deep understanding of her own strength that few others ever had the opportunity to develop. She thought of the frightened 17-year-old girl who had first begun her elaborate disguise, desperate to avoid the fate that had claimed her sister's spirit. That girl could never have imagined standing here now, bonded freely to the most powerful wolf in the world, not through force or obligation, but through genuine choice and mutual respect. Draven found her a short while later, settling beside her as she continued gazing up at the stars. "You seem lost in thought," he observed gently. "I am simply grateful," Alara said, leaning into his steady presence, "for everything that brought us to this moment. Even the fear, even the years of hiding, all of it shaped me into someone capable of recognizing genuine partnership when it finally arrived." "I am equally grateful," Draven said, wrapping his arm gently around her shoulders. "Centuries of searching led me to a woman brave enough to hide when hiding was necessary, and even braver still, to finally step into the light when the time was right. I could not have asked for a more remarkable partner to share my life with, Alara. Nor could I have imagined finding someone who valued my strength rather than seeking to diminish it," Alara replied softly, resting her head against his shoulder as the celebration continued in the distance behind them. They remained together beneath the vast, star-filled sky, no longer separated by fear or secrecy or the weight of unspoken truth. Alara Whitfield, once known throughout her pack as the blind Omega-2 damage to be claimed, now stood fully seen, fully herself, bonded not through obligation, but through genuine choice, beside a king who had looked beyond her carefully constructed disguise and recognized, from the very beginning, the remarkable strength that had always existed within her. Her decade of hiding had finally, truly, come to an end, and in its place stood something far more powerful than any disguise she had ever constructed, a life built on honesty, mutual respect, and a partnership chosen freely by two equals who had both, in their own ways, learned the true meaning of being seen. The end.